For real. That's cool. But I would do a private message or something like that. Or, so, what I'm trying to say is we are starting our journey into, duality. I'm going to tell you, I'll get into it later, but right off the bat, I'm not a believer in duality. Personally. I think it's a delusion. And it's about as important as decorating a mug. And that's it. It stops there for me. We'll get into it. The whole thing is discussion of the whole thing, meaning tonight's story. And for the next few weeks, we're going to read the novella. It was originally published as a Shilling Shocker. So for 1 shilling in England, you buy this thin little pamphlet, and it's printed on cheap paper, and may or may not have some illustrations in it, and you buy it at the newsstand on the corner. The newspaper is like real reading, and they also have had books, of course, in Victorian London. But guess what the modern equivalent of the Shilling Shocker is? It's a comic book, right? Or a graphic novel. So graphic novels and comic books can be totally deep, and they're a series, right? So things go on across time, and so they are incredibly engaging and incredibly inspiring. And this, so I meant to also say that a Shilling Shocker in the UK is called a penny dreadful in the United States, because at the time it was selling for a mere penny. So it's a penny dreadful or a Shilling Shocker, okay? But it's cool, and they're it's all the same stuff. And I've read from Varney here, and maybe I'll read from Varney again, at some point. But any case, this one by Robert Louis Stevenson, whom we know very well today, pulp fiction, right? It's just regular pulp, but duality is a trap, and we're going to talk about that real quick. And we're also going to witness it, right? We're going to go through the story ourselves. But the story, I'll tell you about it. This book sold 40,000 copies in 6 months. In 1888 was the first, so it was first published in 1886. It was then, in 1888, 2 years later, first stage adaptation with Richard Mansfield. And he was an incredible kind of actor where they did this transformation. I'd love to play, like Lon Chaney as Phantom of the Opera was great. He used tape and wire in his face to create the skull look, and he put wire in his nose to bring it up like so, and that's cool. But in 1888, on stage with, at the time that you were using limelight or whatever, with whatever, I don't know, what kind of lights they had in stagecraft in 1888. But we can imagine it was not what we have today, of course. But with minimal lighting and minimal makeup, he would drink his draft. Richard Mansfield would drink his draft on stage and then get into it, just start hunkering down with almost like a physical transformation. And he would make it, and he would get ugly. And what a role! What fun you could have, And he really freaked people out. That was a problem. And somebody, let me see here, what I wanted to say. I've got all my notes on the screen now, so I'm going to read them off. So at the same time in 1888, that's when Jack the Ripper was running through the streets of London. And that's when inner city London was built almost like catacombs. It was like gnarly streets with multiple levels and weird little blind tunnels and stuff like that, you know? That's what was going on. And then, so let me say, so he was finding people in the lower, in Whitechapel, which was a lower income place, and factories, and they had prostitutes in the street, and Jack the Ripper was going there. And it was a real life parallel to what was going on, not only in these 40, perhaps by that time it was like, 100,000 or something, like circulating of this Shilling Shocker circulating in London, and on the stage it was a hit play with this man named Richard Mansfield, who was an extremely popular actor at the time. And of course, Stevenson is catapulted into stardom at the time. And the murders are going on, so somebody writes into the cops and says, this guy Richard Mansfield's way too good on stage, and he's very, very scary, and only someone who could probably commit murder in real life would be that good. So somebody had, at least one person wrote a letter to the cops at the time, the bobbies in London at the time, saying that the actor playing Jekyll and Hyde was probably also out there committing the Ripper murders. So, wow, that would suck, to have that pinned on you. But it didn't stick, of course. By 1901, 250,000 copies of the book were sold just in the USA. Just in the USA. It is speculated that the massive sales were due to projected moral instincts of the public. So they're buying it and reading it and going, oh, tut tut, I could never do anything like that. And of course, it's Victorian society, so they're all, buttoned up and with their, proper what, and like, come on, man. So it's a whole bunch of societal repression and very private activities that one does in private is perversion. Today, I hope that at least 40% of us understand and embrace, the deviant practices. Even just dyeing one's hair blue, even just listening to some punk rock on a Friday night, right? But back in the Victorian days, if you were listening to, or if you were doing something that society didn't, accept, you were not only a deviant, but you were a pervert, and you were probably criminal, and you were definitely, even this man who did such a great job acting on stage was possibly criminal because it was too good of a job, right? So this is bad. It's bad. So it's a society of repression. And what's our society going to bring us to in the next few weeks? I don't have much hope, but I have much hope for the underground groundswell, the grassroots groundswell, let's call it, of people being real, practicing love, practicing generosity, practicing openness with, with one another, with gender issues, and with sexuality. There's a great deal to be said. I mean, all you have to do is listen to a couple podcasts of Dan Savage, and you'll understand what many people are going through. There's got to be tolerance for this. This is ridiculous. People are sovereign beings. Their bodies are sovereign. You know, the government cannot control what goes on in a human's body, a woman's body. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is, in Victorian London, it was very easy to step out of the lines of society. I lost my place in my notes. So, 1901, 250,000 copies were sold. By 1931, that was when the film was made, Frederick March. If you've been watching my Facebook page, then you know what I've been posting. It's Frederick March as Dr. Jekyll, and I say Jekyll. My friends say Jekyll. My friend Adam says Jekyll. But we noticed that in the 1931 film, for some reason, there were, I mean, like in 1945, 1950s, Superman, they used to try to normalize his name and call him Superman. Superman. Well, they call Jekyll Jekyll. As Adam has just said, just now, in the comments, Jekyll. And you skipped ahead of me, Mr. Jekyll. Jekyll. Anyway, we're still watching that film today. If you haven't seen it recently, put it on again, man, for Halloween, because it's awesome. Jekyll, but for 1931, the effects are wonderful, and he seems to transform right in front of your eyes. He's great. They do it in a time lapse with the multiple fades and add. I will talk to you later, Mr. Rothenberg. Wonderful to see you, and why don't you rest your eyes a little bit? The story will start later, sooner. I mean, in a few minutes. I didn't want to skip this. I can't skip this information. I want everybody who's watching this miniseries to know a few things, you know. So we were talking about 1931, the fabulous film that we know today. It's called The Curious, or The Strange Case. Actually, when Stevenson, Mr. Hyde, did they call him Mr. Hyde? How you doing, Patrick? No, they didn't call him Jekyll and Hyde. Did they call him Jekyll and Hyde? I thought it was Hyde. I thought they called him Hyde, man. Some of those, it was pre-code, so it was actually kind of a sexy film. You know, Hyde goes out and has some, you know, pretty risque adventures out there. So, let me see. I'm noticing there might be a little bit of a video problem. I'm not sure. I'm just really hyper aware because we've had streaming problems in the past. So, hopefully this will be okay. I'm just watching the video quality. So, like Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Yeah. Hey, Patrick. Like Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, when they were camping. That's good? All right, thanks. Thanks, Amira. When they were staying at the chalet in Geneva, Switzerland, when Mary Shelley, Byron, I think was Keats there? I'm not sure if he was, but John Polidori was there, and they had the challenge to write a spooky story or something like that, and then Mary went to sleep and she had a nightmare, and that became Frankenstein. In a few months, we're going to. I have a plan for us now. Actually, if we're still weird COVID time, if we start going out on Saturday nights and it becomes like a regular thing, I don't need to do this anymore. I'm doing this because we're trapped together. You know, like, because weird crap's going on in the world, and, you know, like, let's sort of hang out and enjoy one another's company and listen to a story, right? That's why I'm doing Storytelling Live. But I have a plan to take us through the winter. We're going to listen to this, then we're going to do a story of mine, which has Moroccans, Arabs in space, or one particular Arab in space. And then we'll do some detectives. And then in the new year, we'll go to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So Mary Shelley was inspired by a dream, a nightmare, wherein she saw when she was sleeping, she woke up in the chalet in Geneva, Lake Geneva, in Switzerland. And she saw the yellow eyes. Oh, thank you, Diana. She saw the yellow eyes of the monster, of Baron von Frankenstein's monster, right? That was a dream. But guess what? Stevenson was getting sick. He was getting ill. Thank you, Amira. Thank you, Diana and Amira. Thank you so much. Stevenson was getting sick, and he had a dream. And he saw, this is literally the real story behind Jekyll and Hyde. He saw the transformation in a nightmare as he was being, like, in the early morning, and I guess his wife woke him up. And he was like, no, you just ruined this thing I was watching. I was like, you know, he was deep in his dream. And you know how it feels when you wake up from a dream, you're like, you're dazed and you can't quite connect, and you're like still, your eyes are open, but you're still in the middle of your dream, right? So Stevenson wrote this because of a dream. He watched the transformation. That was the first thing he saw. He wrote the first thing in a fervor in 3 days. His wife was editing it. She realized, as she was editing his work, she realized he was writing an allegory. He says, no, this is a short story. This is a thing that I saw. And she says, no, this is a real allegory. This is amazing. And he said, how did it go? Okay, so the weirdness is that apparently the legend, we don't know if this is true or not, but apparently he burned the first manuscript, and he showed her the ashes. And she said, what did you do? He says, oh, I'm going to write it all from scratch, all again. He wrote this whole thing from beginning, I guess, to the middle as an allegory, and that is what made it a universal tale, is because it's now focused. It's not just the tale of a man who drinks a potion and gets turned into a monster and goes out and, you know, wreaks havoc, but it is a core aspect of how many people view the human psyche, as in Freud, as in id, ego, and superego. The id is the Hyde. The ego must juggle between id and superego. It's like the devil's on your left shoulder and the angel's on your right. You know what I'm saying? This whole thing. Now we're getting into the weirdness. So I already talked about the Victorian notion of like these rich upper crust people with their society and all this blah blah crap, you know, public self versus private self. So what would they do in public? They would basically be acting a role that they would give themselves, you know, and at home in their private lives, they would be doing much probably the same as we do today. Humans have not changed much in hundreds of thousands of years, whatever, man. I mean, I don't know, ancient aliens kind of thing. But I mean, I'm saying, okay, let's say that human society is about 10,000 years old. It's probably a little older than 10,000. Human society, as we know it, as humans who look like us, you know, it's older than 10,000 years. But let's just say it's about 10,000 years. Humans and the society and the things that they do and even the debates that they have don't always refuse allegory. I am mighty and stand on my own. Interesting. This was written as an allegory. Thank you, Diana. It was amazing. But she's, you know, you've got a point, but this was written as a giant metaphor for the human mind and not just the human mind, but the Victorian mind with the social. So society changes. Let's say society changes, but the human mind really doesn't change. Human nature hasn't changed for 10,000 years. We are the same. We are really the same. We are engaging in the same deviant acts as we ever have been. We are engaging in the same acceptable acts as we ever have been. That's what it is. It's society. So there was the number one duality between public and private, social hypocrisy, outward respectability and inward lust, food. Oh, alimony. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's the song that my dryer plays when it's done. My dryer's done. So anyway, so that's alimony, not allegory. Okay. Victorian notion of public self versus private self. There was a serious class division. We still have a serious class division. Social hypocrisy, food lust, drink lust, drug lust, money lust, body lust, blood lust. Edinburgh, Scotland. That's Stevenson's hometown. We're talking now about architectural dichotomy. We're also talking about not Edinburgh, but London as well. Whitechapel and versus the greater London, where the inner city streets are small and winding. And the greater city is designed architecturally completely differently. That means it's got wide open streets, and that's why they went through inner city London and got rid of a lot of the, let's just loosely call them catacombs of inner city London. That's the darkened streets, and that's the ledges, the levels that they used to have, and improvised sort of catwalks and tunnels and stuff like that used to be. And there were, you know, not only just dark, completely dark alleys, but that were not lit by city lights, but that were hidden away. And this is where the Ripper left some of their victims. So anyway, Stevenson's hometown, Edinburgh, Scotland, had an inner city of the poor and wide, clean streets of the rich. And so we're talking about a dichotomy, architectural dichotomy. And the heart of the matter is the notion of duality. And duality, in my opinion, is an illusion. And to think of in terms of duality is to be trapped in the terms of duality. Does that make sense to you? In my humble opinion, IMHO, duality ought to be a signature trait of the past. Moving us forward into the future, we need to obliterate the idea of duality. People say, oh yeah, but it's so cool, you know how it fits together like in the yin-yang? Yeah, well it doesn't. The yin-yang is deeper than one would think. You can't just draw a picture of a thing and then just say, oh yeah, heads or tails? Okay, no, because if you're all heads, then you're waiting for tails, you know what I'm saying? And if you duality, then you're going to think of, well then there's us, and then there's them. There's here, and there's there. And that's why Guess Who doesn't like, he likes here. He doesn't like over there. It's just here is good. There, we don't trust him. That's duality. That's duality at work in politics. Right? This has got to be done away with. We could talk more about it. I won't, because I need to probably get into... I have given you... This is a half hour of opening, but that's because we're going on a long voyage together. And I want us all to be equally... I won't say this at the beginning of every episode. So, Jekyll and Hyde is the story that made Robert Louis Stevenson a legend in his lifetime. This comes from the Adirondack Daily Enterprise opinion column. And that's from, let's see, what's this? Right on. Thank you, Amira. I look forward to seeing you weekly, and we'll stay in contact. Thank you. And is that Jay, you are the man, Jay. So if no one knows Jay, you must know Jay, because he's the man. Jay's the man. I need to break some bread with Jay. Diana, when you put a mirror in the middle of your face, you can see the dual nature of yourself. Each side, making each side the same. Well, we can think about things in terms of duality, and then you will be expecting duality. But life is not duality. Life is a twisting reality. Life is braided. It is not parted in two. It is braided. Hey, Mona Lisa, I am very happy to see you here, and I love you very much, and I wish we were talking over a fire or something like that, you know. Duality is not duality. Duality, there is no such thing as actual duality. There are two halves to an object, but there are not two halves to a self. There are not two halves. We are multiplicitous. We are varying, and we need to give ourselves permission to shift and change every day. And we are reborn continuously, and we develop and we grow. We are not simply this or that. We are many things, and that's who we are, in my humble opinion. Jekyll and Hyde is the story that made Robert Louis Stevenson a legend in his lifetime. Today, thanks to cultural evolution, we are desensitized to the shock value of Stevenson's Gothic novelette that would have had the shock value that Stevenson's Gothic novelette would have had on the Victorian mindset in the late 19th century. Stevenson, if you like, is the one you can blame for kicking open the door into forbidden things with this story and enabling generations. Thank you both, Amira and Diana. I look forward to further conversations with you on the notions of duality or other things. Absolutely. You're not either male or female. Huh? We are iterations of many things. There might even be other genders that we have not named yet. We don't even have terms in our language. Language is nothing. Language is an illusion anyway. Language is a confection. In any case. So language could be mistaken about gender. Language could be mistaken about identity. It's very easy. And we can be accidentally, because within a language is a culture. It's bizarre because once you start learning a new language, then you start to understand new culture. Humanity has not changed in 10,000 years, but we're talking society and culture. Well, what is humanity? Humanity is actually a basic set of needs and wants and desires and behaviors. But culture and society are constructs. So that when you learn a new language, you enter into this new construct and you see how, I learned, here's a little basic thing about culture and construct. It is an illusion decided to control. Yes, we are one. Yes, with many facets. Yes, when you try to separate body from mind, this is Paul Catafago. With many facets. The other, when you try to separate body from mind from spirit, that's when it messes you up. Yeah, it's all thread. It's all connected. The source is one. Indeed, the source is one. The source is heart. The source is the heart. The source is Allah. Stuff like that. We can say, any case, so what I'm trying to say is a little bit going back to society and culture. When I was first learning French, I realized that, and I was living in France, and I was speaking French with French, not ever speaking any English, having left wanting to leave my entire culture behind, and the entire culture that I grew up with that didn't understand me, because what's a Yusuf in a Christian society? I mean, I had no idea at the time when I was like 18 or 19. Anyway, so I wanted to abandon my previous culture and just melt into a new culture. And I learned that a little tiny expression has a whole lot to do with how one thinks about oneself. So in America, when you go to someone's house and you eat their food, you say, I'm full. And when you're full, like the bag of your stomach is actually chock full. It's actually swollen up with the food that you've eaten. That's full. You're full. And that actually gives you this particular feeling, and it has a lasting effect on your body from getting full, right? When you go to France, and you start speaking with French, they have a totally different expression that their body, it changes their body. It changes their mind. It changes their outlook. They say, I have eaten enough. Well, guess what? You could be 3/4 full and you've eaten enough. You know what I'm saying? So that actually changes your whole life. And it changes your heart attack later. You know, it changes your energy for later. What? Don't bring it up now, man. Amira. Morocco, they eat a lot. And Morocco, actually, gout is a problem, and that's overeating. Microplastics in food. We're not going to start talking about that, but I love talking to you guys. I love it. Yeah, thanks Diana. But we're just talking about no, I'm trying to make a point, man. You know, you're ruining it by mentioning Morocco. I know about Morocco, man. I'm not mentioning Morocco on purpose because of the eating habits. You know, but we're just saying, so the French say, I have eaten enough. And then well, we've eaten enough. You know, in Morocco, you eat very little a lot of times. And then you go to like a meal at someone's house, and the meal is physically presented in a pile. It's a pile of food you're sitting in front of. And it's a huge bowl with a pile. And you're sitting around and you're interacting with that, and you're like, yeah, pile, it's feast time, man. Well, now things have changed a little bit. There is a great impoverished population, but there is another population in Morocco who eats well every single night. And that's why some people have gout. I'm not going to say any more because it's actually political trouble. And you're hungry again 3 days later. Anyway, I'm just saying, in the United States, they say you're full, and in France, they say, I have eaten enough. And that little bit of language changes a person. It changes your outlook. So culture is trapped up in language. So language is a construct, just like, I won't say anymore. We're having too much fun doing this. Maybe we should just fart around all night, huh? I just wanted to take a few more moments to say a few tiny little things, and then we'll get headlong into this book. The point is that Robert Louis Stevenson became a legend for having written this little 90-page little thing. 90 little pages, and it's as important culturally, it was at the time as important culturally as a comic book or and I'm not to diminish comic books or graphic novels, because they're really important. And I mean, like, how many people have read Mouse? How many people have read Habibi? Have you read Habibi? Don't get me started. How many people have read, like, great, the Watchmen, Society of Extraordinary Gentlemen, or something like that. The Extraordinary Gentlemen, or some. They're great. There have been some great graphic novels that have changed the way we look at things, for sure. They become movies. Okay, enough on that. So it was a pulp novel, and it changed society, and it caused plays. Cat in the Hat, actually, it wasn't sold as a comic book first. It's always been sort of a hardbound children's book, but yeah, it's like you would think that the Cat in the Hat's just like a slim little thing, and it wouldn't have much of an effect on our society as it does, but it so did. It very, very much did. Thank you, Dinah. What else we are going to say here? So, Jekyll and Hyde is the story that made Robert Louis Stevenson a legend in his lifetime. Today, thanks to cultural evolution, we are desensitized to the shock value Stevenson's Gothic novelette would have had on the Victorian mindset of the late 19th century. Stevenson, if you like, is the one you can blame for kicking open the door to forbidden things with this story, and enabling generations of artists to freely explore the dark side in all of us, so that now we are all used to it and nothing shocks us anymore. Stevenson did receive criticism for taking this step toward a general immorality, even from friends. One of his best friends, John Addington Symonds, found the book brilliant yet painful, wrote to Robert Louis Stevenson to say, "At last I have read Dr. Jekyll. It makes me wonder whether a man has the right to scrutinize the abysmal deeps of personality. It is indeed a dreadful book, the most dreadful, because of a certain moral callousness, a want of empathy, a shutting out of hope. The art is intense. Poe is as water. As a piece of literary work, this seems to me the finest you have done in all the regards: style, invention, psychological analysis, exquisite fitting of parts, and an admirable employment of motives to realize the abnormal. But it has left such a deeply painful impression on my heart that I do not know how I'm ever to turn to it again." Did Stevenson really open up a Pandora's box of human misbehavior, like some people like to think, even to this day? Was it just a coincidence that Jack the Ripper started making news at about the same time Jekyll and Hyde became a catchphrase? So did Stevenson give the Ripper permission? That's a big if. A concerned public wanted answers. So when Robert Louis Stevenson came to Saranac Lake, he wrote an essay called A Chapter on Dreams, which appeared in the January 1888 of Scribner's Magazine. January 1888 issue of Scribner's Magazine. He says, "I had long been trying to write a story on this topic, to find a body, a vehicle, for that strong sense of man's double being, which must at times come in upon and overwhelm the mind of every thinking creature. I had even written one, The Traveling Companion, which was returned by the editor on the plea that it was a work of genius and indecent, and which I burned the other day, on the ground that it was not a work of genius, and that Jekyll had supplanted it. And now we are ready to hear the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, he published it originally as Strange Case. No the, just Strange Case. So we'll call it Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Story of the Door. Mr. Utterson the lawyer was a man of rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile, cold, scanty, and embarrassed in discourse, backward in sentiment, lean, long, lusty, dreary, and yet somehow lovable. At friendly meetings, and when the wine was to his taste, something eminently human beaconed from his eye, something indeed which never found its way into his talk, but which spoke not only in these silent symbols of the after-dinner face, but more often and loudly in the acts of his life. He was an austere within himself, drank gin when he was alone, to mortify a taste for vintages, and though he enjoyed the theatre, he had not crossed the doors of one for 20 years. But he had an approved tolerance for others, sometimes wondering, almost with envy, at the high pressure of spirits involved in their misdeeds, and in any extremity inclined to help rather than to reprove. I incline to Cain's heresy. He used to say quaintly, I let my brother go to the devil in his own way. In his character, it was frequently his fortune to be the last reputable acquaintance and the last good influence in the lives of down-going men. And to such as these, so long as they come about his chambers, he never marked a shade of change in his demeanor. Bernard, I'm so happy to see you here, sir. I miss you very much, my friend. No doubt the feat was easy to Mr. Utterson, for he was undemonstrative at the best, and given his friendship seemed to be founded in a similar catholicity of good nature. This is a Catholic in old London town when they were all Protestant already. For he was undemonstrative at the best, and even his friendship seemed to be founded in a similar catholicity of good nature. It is the mark of a modest man to accept his friendly circle ready-made from the hands of opportunity, and that was the lawyer's way. His friends were those of his own blood, or those whom he had known the longest. His affections, like ivy, were the growth of time. They implied no aptness in the object, hence, no doubt, the bond that united him to Mr. Richard Mansfield, his distant kinsman, the well-known man about town. It was a nut to crack for many what these two could see in each other, or what subject they could find in common. It was reported by those who encountered them in their Sunday walks that they said nothing, looked singularly dull, and would hail with obvious relief the appearance of a friend. For all that, the two men put the greatest store by excursions, counted them the chief jewel of each week, and not only set aside occasions of pleasure, but even resisted the calls of business that they might enjoy them uninterrupted. It chanced, upon one of these rambles, that their way led them down a by-street in a busy quarter of London. The street was small, and what is called quiet, but it drove a thriving trade on the weekdays. The inhabitants were all doing well, it seemed, and all emulously hoping to do better still, and laying out the surplus of their grains in coquetry, so that the shop front stood along the thoroughfare with an air of invitation like rows of smiling saleswomen. Even on Sunday, when it veiled its more florid charms, and lay comparatively empty of passage, the street shone out in contrast to its dingy neighborhood, like a fire in a forest, and with its freshly painted shutters, well-polished brasses, and general cleanliness and gaiety of note, instantly caught and pleased the eye of the passenger. So, I'm going to take a moment here and translate, because again, we're delving into Victorian fiction, and sometimes the language is a little bit too floral for us to understand in our very practical American English of today. So what I'm saying is, two gentlemen have known each other forever. One of them, Mr. Utterson, he is oftentimes the champion of the downtrodden. And he is walking with his old friend, Mr. Enfield. And Mr. Enfield is an upper crust gentleman of the London sort. And they apparently, people who see them together, watch them walking in silence. And it seems as though they can't really stand one another's company. However, they will put off whatever they can in order to walk together again on their regular walks. Because I believe, or because one believes, that the routine, merely the routine of being together and walking, doing their little walk together, is what satisfies them the most. Not even the conversation anymore. So, one day, this is what we've read so far. So, one day, they walk down a street. They're going through some shabby streets, right? So now they're already evaluating neighborhoods and Duality. And they just traipsed into a sweet-looking street, right? With storefronts that look like women. What was it? Yeah, it's like, they look like, it just says that they look like saleswomen or something like that. So, it's like, any case. But the truth is in here, is a good story in here, never mind the language. Okay, so they turn the corner, and they're in a pretty-looking street, a kind of a pretty-looking street, yeah? With storefronts and everything, despite the neighborhood that it's in. So it's an industry, there's business going on. There's a lot of business. And shopkeepers and, what's it called? Fabricants? People making things, yeah? In the streets, in the buildings. So, the street was small and what is called quiet, but it drove a thriving trade on the weekdays. The inhabitants were all doing well, as it seemed, and emulously hoping to do better still, and laying out the surplus of their grains in coquetry, so that the shop front stood along that thoroughfare with an air of invitation, like rows of smiling saleswomen. What? Even on Sunday, when it veiled its more florid charms and lay comparatively empty of passage, the street shone out in contrast to the dingy neighborhood like fire in a forest. Yes. And with its freshly painted shutters, well-polished brasses, and general cleanliness and gaiety of note, instantly caught and pleased the eye of the passenger. Two doors from one corner on the left-hand side, going east, the line was broken by the entry of a court. And just at that point, a certain sinister block of building thrust forward at the gable on the street. It was 2 stories high, showed no window, nothing but a door in the lower story, and a blind forehead of discolored wall on the upper, and bore in every feature the marks of prolonged and sordid negligence. The door, which was equipped with neither bell nor knocker, was blistered and disdained. Tramps slouched into the recesses, and struck matches on the panels. Children kept shop on the steps. The schoolboy had tried his knife on the mouldings, and for close on a generation no one had appeared to drive away these random visitors or to repair their ravages. So we've also got a bit of architectural prejudice going on here, right? So we see in this pretty little street, we see an ugly edifice, sort of like in a street of edifices. There is one sort of storefront that sort of lurches out into the sidewalk, and it's like dingy gray, and there are no windows on it. There's one door, and there are people collected around the base of it. Yes? So, what's going on here? Mr. Enfield and the lawyer were on the other side by the by-street. When they came abreast of the entry, the former lifted up his cane and pointed. "Did you ever remark upon that door?" he asked. When his companion had replied in the affirmative, "It is connected in my mind," added he, with a very odd story." "Indeed," said Mr. Utterson, with a slight change of his voice. "And what was that?" "Well, it was this way," returned Mr. Enfield. "I was coming home from some place at the end of the world, about 3 o'clock, on a black winter morning, and my way lay through a part of town where there was literally nothing to be seen but lamps, street after street, and all the folks asleep. Oh yes. There was literally nothing to be seen but lamps, street after street, and all the folks asleep, street after street, all lighted up, as if for a procession, and all empty as a church, till at last I got into that state of mind when a man listens, and begins to long for the sight of a policeman. All at once I saw 2 figures. One, a little man, who was stumping along eastward at a good walk, and the other, a girl, maybe 8 or 10, who was running as hard as she was able, down the cross street. Well, sir, the 2 ran into one another, naturally enough, at the corner. And then came the horrible part of the thing, for the man trampled calmly over the child's body and left her screaming on the ground. It sounds nothing to hear, but it was hellish to see. It wasn't like a man. It was like some damned juggernaut. I gave a few "Halloa!" took to my heels, collared my gentleman, and brought him back to where there was already quite a group about the screaming child. He was perfectly cool, made no resistance, but gave me one look so ugly that it brought the sweat on me, like running. The people who had turned out were the girl's own family, and pretty soon the doctor for whom she had been sent put in his appearance. Well, the child was not much for the worse, more frightened, according to the sawbones, and there you might have supposed would be an end to it. But there was one curious circumstance. I had taken a loathing to my gentleman at first sight. So had the child's family, which was only natural. But the doctor's case was what struck me. He was the usual cut-and-dry apothecary of no particular age and colour, with a strong Edinburgh accent, and about as emotional as a bagpipe. Well, sir, he was like the rest of us every time he looked at my prisoner. I saw that the sawbones turned sick and white with the desire to kill him. I knew what was in his mind, just as I knew what was in mine, and killing being out of the question, we did the next best. We told the man we could and would make such a scandal out of this as should make his name stink from one end of London to the other. If he had any friends or any credit, we undertook that he should lose them, and all the time as we were pitching it in red hot. We were keeping the women off him as best we could, for they were as wild as harpies. I never saw a circle of such hateful faces. And there was the man in the middle, with a kind of black, sneering coolness, frightening too. I could see that. But carrying it off, sir, really like Satan. "If you choose to make a capital out of this accident," said he, "I am naturally helpless. No gentleman but wishes to avoid a scene," says he. "Name your figure." Well, we screwed him up to £100 for the child's family. We would have clearly liked to stick it out, but there was something about the lot of us that meant mischief, and at last he struck. The next thing was to get the money, and where do you think he carried us but to that place with the door? Whipped out a key, went in, and presently came back with a matter of £10 in gold, and a cheque for the balance on Coots, drawn payable to bearer and signed, with a name that I can't mention now, though it's one of the points of my story, but it was a name at least very well known and often printed. The figure was stiff, but the signature was good for more than that, if it was only genuine. I took the liberty of pointing out to my gentleman that the whole business looked apocryphal, and that the man does not in real life walk into a cellar door at 4 a.m. and come out with another man's cheque for close to £100. But he was quite easy and sneering. "Set your mind at rest," says he. "I will stay with you till the bank's open. I'd cash the check myself." So we all set off, the doctor and the child's father, and our friend and myself, and passed the rest of the night in my chambers, and the next day, when we had breakfasted, went in and bought it to the bank. I gave in the check myself, and I said I had every reason to believe it was a forgery. Not a bit of it. The check was genuine. "Tut, tut," said Mr. Utterson. "I see you feel as I do," said Mr. Enfield. "Yes, it's a bad story. For my man was a fellow that nobody could have to do with. A really damnable man. And the person who drew the check is the very pink of the proprieties. Celebrated, too. And what makes it worse, one of your fellows who do what they call good. Blackmail, I suppose. An honest man paying through the nose for some of the capers of his youth. Blackmail House is what I call the place with the door. In consequence. Though even that, you know, is far from explaining it all," he added, with the words that fell into a vein of musing. From this he was recalled by Mr. Utterson, acting rather suddenly. "And you don't know if the drawer of the check, if the drawer, the writer of the check, is still living there?" "That's a likely place, isn't it?" returned Mr. Enfield. "But I happen to have noticed his address. He lives in the same square, or same neighborhood." "And you never asked about the place with the door?" said Mr. Utterson. "No, sir, I have had a delicacy," was the reply. "I feel very strongly about putting questions. It partakes too much of the style and day of judgment. You start a question, it's like starting into a stone. You sit quietly at the top of a hill, you sit quietly at the top of a hill, and away the stone goes, starting others, and presently some bland old bird, the last you would have thought of, is knocked on the head with his own back garden, and the family has to change the name. No, sir, I make it a rule of mine, the more it looks like a queer street, the less I ask." "A very good rule, too," said the lawyer. "But I have studied the place for myself," continued Mr. Enfield. "It seems scarcely a house. There is no other door, and nobody goes in or out of that one. But once in a great while, the gentleman of my adventure. There are 3 windows looking on the court on the first floor, none below. The windows are always shut, but they're clean. And there's a chimney, which is generally smoking. So somebody must live there, and it's not for sure. For the buildings are so packed together about the court that it's hard to say where one ends and the other begins." The pair walked on again for a while in silence, and then, "Enfield," said Mr. Utterson, "that's a good rule of yours." "Yes, I think it is," returned Enfield. "But for all that," continued the lawyer, "there's one important point I want to ask. I want to ask the same of that man who walked over the child." "Well," said Mr. Enfield, "I can't see what harm it would do. He was a man of the name of Hyde." Said Mr. Utterson. "What sort of a man is he to see?" "He's not easy to describe. There is something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I so scarce know why. He must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point. He was an extraordinary-looking man, and yet I really can name nothing out of the way. No, sir, I can make no hand of it. I can't describe him, and it's not want of memory, for I declare I can see him at the moment." Mr. Utterson again walked some way in silence, obviously under a weight of consideration. "Are you sure he used a key?" inquired he at last. "My dear sir," began Enfield, surprised out of himself. "Yes, I know," said Mr. Utterson. It must seem strange, but the fact is, if I do not ask you the name of the other party, it's because I know it already. You see, Richard, your tail... your tail has gone home, If you have been inexact at any point, you had better correct it. I think you might have warned me, returned the other with a touch of sullenness, but I have been pedantically exact, as you call it. The fellow had a key, and what's more, he has it still. I saw him use it not 1 week ago. Mr. Utterson sighed deeply, but never said a word, and the young man presently resumed. Here's another lesson. To say nothing, said he. I am ashamed of my long tongue. Let us make a bargain, never to refer to this again. With all my heart, said the lawyer. I shake hands on that, Richard. And that's the first account. Hey, Rosana, ¿cómo estás? So this is how the book is made. This is how the novella is designed. It's not chapters, it's accounts. It's like personal accounts. So the book is called Strange Case, and the reader is invited to sort of piece it together for themselves. You see? So the reader is, muy bien, querida, encantado que estás aquí con nosotros, and que seas aquí con nosotros. And y yo sé que es un poco tarde ahí, you know, but perhaps you can stay up a little bit and watch with us. So what I'm saying is that this book is called Strange Case. So it's as if we were, it's, the reader is in the detective situation. So we're reading these personal accounts, and we're meant to piece it all together ourselves, bit by bit. Yeah. I don't know that books had been written from this perspective yet. So, you know, this is really great, you know, really great. But, of course, sequence of letters, you know, in social interchange, stuff like that, that's been done. This is 1888, so it's actually late in the game. So, you know, a few of these items, a few of these elements are tropes already. But the search for Mr. Hyde, that's the next chapter. I think I'm going to... I can read a chapter, maybe two. Oh yeah, I can read two. Because they're short. So hang on. Maybe three. Excuse me. Yeah. Great. This is called it's just called Search for Mr. Hyde. That evening, Mr. Utterson came home to his bachelor house in somber spirits. Just a minute, let me do something to this. Blah, blah. Boop. Okay. So here we are. Search for Mr. Hyde. Yes. Thank you, Rosanna. That evening, Mr. Utterson came home to his bachelor house in somber spirits and sat down to dinner without relish. It was his custom of a Sunday, when this meal was over, to sit close by the fire, a volume of some dry divinity on his reading desk, until the clock of the neighboring church rang out the hour of 12, when he would go soberly and gratefully to bed. On this night, however, as soon as the cloth was taken away, he took up a candle and went into his business room. There he opened his safe, took from the most private part of it a document endorsed on the envelope as Dr. Jekyll's will, and sat down with a clouded brow to study its contents. The will was holograph for Mr. Utterson, though he took charge of it now that it was made. You guys know about a holographic will? Okay, you can look it up. You can Google it. I can't get into it right now. But it's a holographic will. The will was holographed for Mr. Utterson, though he took charge of it now that it was made, had refused to lend the least assistance in the making of it. It provided not only that, in case of the decease of Dr. Henry Jekyll, M.D., D.C.L., LL.D., F.R.S., etc., all his possessions were to pass into the hands of his friend and benefactor, Edward Hyde, but that in the case of Dr. Jekyll's disappearance or unexplained absence for any period exceeding 3 calendar months, the said Edward Hyde should step into the said Henry Jekyll's shoes without further delay and free from any burden or obligation beyond the payment of a few small sums to the members of the doctor's household. This document had long been the lawyer's eyesore. It offended him both as a lawyer and as a lover of the sane and customary sides of his life, to whom the fanciful was the immodest, and hitherto it was his ignorance of Mr. Hyde that had swelled his indignation. Now, by a sudden turn, it was his knowledge. It was already bad enough when the name was but a name of which he could... Okay. And hitherto it was his ignorance of Mr. Hyde that had swelled his indignation. By a sudden turn, it was of his knowledge. It was already bad enough when the name was but a name of which he could learn no more. It was worse when he began to be clothed upon with detestable attributes, and out of the shifting insubstantial mists that had so long baffled his eye, there leapt up the sudden, definite presentiment of a fiend. "I thought it was madness," he said, as he replaced the obnoxious paper in the safe. "And now I begin to fear it is disgrace." With that he blew out his candle, put on a greatcoat, and set forth in the direction of Cavendish Square, that citadel of medicine where his friend the late Dr. Lanyon and his house, and received his crowding patients. If anyone knows, it will be Lanyon, he had thought. The solemn butler knew and welcomed him. He was subjected to no stage of delay, but ushered direct from the door into the dining room, where Dr. Lanyon sat alone over his wine. This was a hearty, healthy, dapper, red-faced gentleman with a shock of hair prematurely white and a boisterous and decided manner. At sight of Mr. Utterson, he sprang up from his chair and welcomed him with both hands. The geniality, as was the way of the man, was somewhat theatrical to the eye, but it reposed on genuine feeling. For these two were old friends, old mates, both at school and college, both through respecters of themselves and of each other, and what does not always follow, men who thoroughly enjoyed one another's company. After a little rambling talk, the lawyer led up to the subject which so disagreeably preoccupied his mind. "I suppose, Lanyon," said he, "you and I must be the two oldest friends that Henry Jekyll has?" "I wish the friends were younger," chuckled Dr. Lanyon, "but I suppose we are. And what of that? I see little of him now." "Indeed?" said Mr. Utterson. "I thought you had a bond of common interest." "We had," was the reply, "but it is more than 10 years since Henry Jekyll became too fanciful for me. He began to go wrong in mind, and though of course I continue to take an interest in him for old sake's sake, as they say, and indeed I see and have seen devilish little of the man. Such unscientific balderdash," added the doctor, flushing suddenly purple, "would have estranged Damon and Pythias." This little spirit of temper was somewhat of a relief to Mr. Utterson. "They have only differed on some point of science, he thought, and being a man of no scientific passions except in the matter of conveyancing, he even added, "It is nothing worse than that." He gave his friend a few seconds to recover his composure, and then he approached the question he had come to put. "Did you ever come across a protege of his?" "Oh, Sabina. ¿Entiendes inglés? Muy bien. Ok, bienvenidos, Sabina." "Did you ever come across a protege of his named Hyde?" he asked. "Hyde," repeated Lanyon. "No, never heard of him. Not since my time." That was the amount of information that the lawyer carried back with him into the great dark bed in which he tossed to and fro until the small hours of morning began to grow large. It was a night of little ease to his toiling mind, toiling in mere darkness and besieged by questions. 6 o'clock struck on the bells of the church that was so conveniently near to Mr. Utterson's dwelling, and still he was digging at the problem. Hitherto it had touched him on the intellectual side alone, but now his imagination also was engaged, or rather enslaved, and as he lay and tossed in the gross darkness of the night in the curtained room, Mr. Enfield's tale went by before his mind in a scroll of lighted pictures. He would be aware of the great field of lamps and of a nocturnal city, then of the figure of a man walking swiftly, then of a child running from the doctors, and then these meet. And that human juggernaut trod the child down and passed on regardless of her screams. Or else he would see a room in a rich house where his friend lay asleep, dreaming and smiling at his dreams. Then the door of that room would be opened, then the curtains of the bed plucked apart. The sleeper recalled, and lo, there would stand by his side a figure to whom power was given, and even at that dead hour he must rise and do its bidding. The figure in these two phases haunted the lawyer all night, and if at any time he dozed over it was but to see it glide more stealthily through the sleeping houses, to move more swiftly and still more swiftly, even to dizziness, through wider labyrinths of lamp-lighted city, and at every street corner crush a child and leave her screaming. And still the figure had no face by which he might know it. Even in his dreams it had no face, or that one baffled him and melted before his eyes. And thus it was that there sprang up and grew apace in the lawyer's mind a singularly strong, almost an inordinate curiosity to behold the features of the one real Mr. Hyde, if he could but once set eyes on him. He thought the mystery would lighten, and perhaps roll altogether away, as was the habit of mysterious things when well examined. He might see a reason for his friend's strange preference of bondage, call it what you please, and even for the startling clause of the will. At least it would be a face worth seeing, the face of a man who was without bowels of mercy, a face which had but to show itself, to raise up in the mind of the unimpressionable Enfield a spirit of enduring hatred. From that time forward, Mr. Utterson began to haunt the door in the by-street shops. In the morning before office hours, at noon, when the business was plenty and time scarce, at night, under the face of the fogged city moon, and by all lights, and at all hours of solitude and concourse, the lawyer was to be found on his chosen post. If he be Mr. Hyde, he had thought, I shall be Mr. Seek. And at last his patience was rewarded. It was a fine, dry night, frost in the air. The streets as clean as the ballroom floor. The lamps unshaken by any wind, drawing a regular pattern of light and shadow. By 10 o'clock, When the shops were closed, the by-street was very solitary, and in spite of the low growl of London from all around, very silent. Small rounds carried far, domestic sounds out of the houses were clearly audible on either side of the roadway, and the rumour of the approach of any passenger preceded him by a long time. Mr. Utterson had been some minutes at his post when he was aware of an odd, light footstep drawing near. In the course of his nightly patrols he had long grown accustomed to the quaint effect with which the footfalls of a single person, while he is still a great way off, suddenly spring out distinct with the vast hum and clatter of the city. Yet his attention had never before been so sharply and decisively arrested, and it was with a strong superstitious prevision of success that he withdrew into the entry of the court. The steps grew swiftly nearer and swelled out suddenly louder. As they turned the end of the street, the lawyer, looking forth from the entry, could soon see what manner of man he had to deal with. He was small and very plainly dressed, and the look of him, even at that distance, went somehow strongly against the watcher's inclination. But he made straight for the door, crossing the roadway to save time, and as he came he drew a key from his pocket like one approaching home. Mr. Utterson stepped out and touched him on the shoulder as he passed. "Mr. Hyde, I think?" Mr. Hyde shrank back with the hissing intake of the breath. But his fear was only momentary, and though he did not look the lawyer in the face, he answered coolly enough, "That's my name. What do you want?" "But I see you're going in," returned the lawyer. "I'm an old friend of Dr. Jekyll's, Mr. Utterson of Gaunt Street. You must have heard of my name in meeting you so conveniently. I thought you might admit me." "You'll not find Dr. Jekyll. He is from home," replied Mr. Hyde, blowing in the key. And suddenly, but still without looking up, "How do you know me?" he asked. "On your side," said Mr. Utterson. "Will you do me a favour?" "With pleasure," replied the other. "What shall it be?" "Will you let me see your face?" said the lawyer. Mr. Hyde appeared to hesitate, and then, as if upon some sudden reflection, fronted about with an air of defiance, and the pair stared at each other pretty fixedly for a few seconds. "Now I shall know you again," said Mr. Utterson. "It may be useful." "Yes," returned Mr. Hyde. "It is as well as we have met. And apropos, you should have my address." And he gave a number of a street in Soho. Good God, thought Mr. Utterson, can he too have been thinking of the will? But he kept his feelings to himself, and only grunted in acknowledgment of the address. "And now," said the other, "how did ye know me?" "By description," was the reply. "Whose description?" "We have common friends." "Hey, Diana, I'm on your tablet, and we can lay down innocently. Oh, how quaint. This is wonderful. Cozy up to me, my dear." So, "Common friends," echoed Mr. Hyde, a little hoarsely. "Who are they?" "We have common friends," said Mr. Utterson. "Common friends," echoed Mr. Hyde a little hoarsely. "Who are they?" "Jekyll, for instance," said the lawyer. "He never told you?" cried Mr. Hyde, with a flush of anger. "I did not think you would have lied." "Come," said Mr. "Come," said Mr. Utterson. "That is not fitting language." The other snarled aloud into a savage laugh, and the next moment, with extraordinary quickness, he had unlocked the door and disappeared into the house. The lawyer stood while, when Mr. Hyde had left him, the picture of disquietude. Then he began slowly to mount the street, pausing every step or two and putting his hand to his brow like a man in a mental perplexity. The problem he was thus debating as he walked was one of a class that is rarely solved. Mr. Hyde was pale and dwarfish, and he gave an impression of deformity without any nameable malformation. He had a displeasing smile. He had borne himself to the lawyer with a sort of murderous mixture of timidity and boldness, and he spoke with a husky, whispering, and somewhat broken voice. All these were points against him, but not all of these together could explain the hitherto unknown disgust, loathing, and fear with which Mr. Utterson regarded him. There must be something else, said the perplexed gentleman. There is something more. If I could find a name for it, God bless me. The man seems hardly human. Something troglodytic, shall we say? Or can it be the old story of Dr. Fell? Or is it the mere radiance of a foul soul that thus transpires through and transfigures its clay continent? The last, I think, for, oh my poor old hairy Jekyll, if I read Satan's signature upon a face, it is that of your new friend. Round the corner from the by-street there was a square of ancient handsome houses, now for the most part decayed from their high estate, and let in flats and chambers to all sorts of conditions of men, map engravers, architects, and shady lawyers, and all the agents of obscure enterprises. One house, however, second from the corner, was still occupied entirely, and at the door of this, which wore a great air of wealth and comfort, though it was now plunged in darkness except for the fanlight, Mr. Utterson stopped and knocked. A well-dressed, elderly servant opened the door. "Is Dr. Jekyll at home, Poole?" asked the lawyer. "I will see Mr. Utterson," said Poole, admitting the visitor, as he spoke, into a large, low-roofed, comfortable hall, paved with flags, warmed, after the fashion of a country house, by a bright open fire, and furnished with costly cabinets of oak. "Will you wait here by the fire, sir, or shall I give you a light in the dining-room?" "Here, thank you," said the lawyer, and he drew near and leaned on the tall fender. This hall, in which he was now left alone, was a pet fancy of his friend the doctor's, and Utterson himself was wont to speak of it as the pleasantest room in London. But tonight there was a shudder in his blood. As the face of Hyde sat heavy on his memory, he felt, what was rare with him, a nausea and distaste of life, and in the gloom of his spirits he seemed to read a menace in the flickering of the firelight and the polished cabinets, and the uneasy starting of the shadow of the roof. He was ashamed of his relief when Poole presently returned to announce that Dr. Jekyll had gone out. "I saw Mr. Hyde go in by the old dissecting room, Poole," he said. Is that right when Dr. Jekyll is from home?" "Quite right, Mr. Utterson, sir," replied the servant. "Mr. Hyde has a key." "Your master seems to repose a great deal of trust in that young man, Poole," resumed the other musingly. "Yes, sir, he does indeed," said Poole. We all have orders to obey him. I do not think I have ever met Mr. Hyde?" Asked Utterson. "Oh, dear no, sir. He never dines here," replied the butler. "Indeed, we see very little of him on this side of the house. He mostly comes and goes by the lavatory. Well, good night, Mr. Poole. Good night, Mr. Utterson." And the lawyer set out homeward with a very heavy heart. "Poor Harry Jekyll," he thought. "My mind misgives me he is in deep waters. He was wild when he was young, a long while ago, to be sure, but in the law of God there is no statute of limitations. It must be that the ghost of some old sin, the cancer of some concealed disgrace, punishment coming pede claudo, years after memory has forgotten and self-love condoned the fault." And the lawyer, scared by the thought, brooded while, on his own past, groping all the corners of memory, lest by some chance of some jack-in-the-box of an old iniquity could leap to light right there. "Hello? Diana? What? Are we having trouble in transmission? Diana, how are we doing here? So, we good? We're good?" We're actually almost done. So, His past was fairly blameless. Few men could read the rolls of their life with less apprehension. Yet he was humbled to the dust by the many ill things he had done, and raised up again to a sober and fearful gratitude by the many he had come so near to doing and yet avoided. And then, by a return on his former subject, he conceived a spark of hope. This Master Hyde... Oh, no trouble? Thank you, Mike. Because I see the video feed. I see a monitor. When I'm looking at you, I also see me. So it's like a mirror, a weird electronic mirror. Anyway, okay. So because, Jay, you're the dude. You're so cool, man. All right. Thanks, Jay. But as I read to you, I see the video feed freeze and then like kind of move quickly. So I'm just running off my iPad here. So I'm just hoping, praying for the best. Yeah? So we're good? All right. Anyway, so we're deep in London here. And remember, it's the mini ice age here after the explosion, after the volcano of Krakatoa blew up in Indonesia, and it sent out a plume of volcanic ash that dimmed the sun for a great deal of time and changed the climate, of England and of Europe and of many places. So somebody out there's angry. What's going on here? What's this anger business? We're all friends here. No need for hot tempers. We're all friends. Any case. So, this Mr. Hyde, if he were studied, thought he, must have secrets of his own, black secrets by the look of them, secrets compared to which poor Jekyll's worst would be like sunshine. Things cannot continue as they are. It turns me cold to think of this creature stealing like a thief to Harry's bedside. Poor Harry, what awakening! And the danger of it. If this Hyde suspects the existence of the will, he may grow impatient to inherit. I must put my shoulders to the wheel. If Jekyll will but let me, he added, if Jekyll will only let me. For once more he saw before him in his mind's eye, as clear as transparency, the strange clauses of the will. Next chapter, and this will be the last for the evening, and it's just very, very short. We're just about out of here. Thank you for sticking with me this far. Thank you for enjoying the story. If you have things to say to me, please private message me. Please talk to me during the week. I'm very available and very open. We're all locked down in one way or another for COVID. Our society is changing beneath our feet. It's a weird time. Anyway. Oh, my God. Anyway, let's just go and let's wrap it up. And let's have a wonderful time, peaceful time tonight. Peace for all of us. Dr. Jekyll was quite at ease. That's what this chapter is called. Dr. Jekyll was quite at ease. A fortnight later, by excellent good fortune, the doctor gave one of his pleasant dinners to some 5 or 6 old cronies, all intelligent, reputable men, and all judges of good wine. And Mr. Utterson so contrived that he remained behind after the others had departed. This was no new arrangement, but a thing that had befallen many scores of times. When Mr. Utterson was liked, he was liked well. Hosts loved to detain the dry lawyer when the light-hearted and loose-tongued had already their foot on the threshold. They like to sit a while in his unobtrusive company, practicing for solitude, sobering their minds with the man's rich silence after the expense and strain of gaiety. Love you too, bro. For real. Jay, you're cool, man. You're a cool guy to know, man. For real. So after the expense and strain and gaiety, to this rule Dr. Jekyll was no exception, and as he now sat on the opposite side of the fire, a large, well-made, smooth-faced man of 50, with something of a stylish cast, perhaps, but every mark of capacity and kindness. You could see by his looks that he cherished for Mr. Utterson a sincere and warm affection. A warm affection, not infection, but affection, yes? "I have been wanting to speak to you, Jekyll," began the latter. "You know that will of yours?" A close observer might have gathered that the topic was distasteful, but the doctor carried it off gaily. "My poor Utterson," said he, "you are unfortunate in such a client. I never saw a man so distressed as you were by my will, unless it were that hide-bound pedant Lanyon at what he called my scientific heresies. Oh, I know he's a good fellow, you needn't frown. An excellent fellow, and I always mean to see more of him, but a hide-bound pedant for all that, an ignorant, blatant pedant. I was never more disappointed by any man than Lanyon. You know, I never approved of it," pursued Utterson, ruthlessly discarding the fresh topic. "My will?" "Yes, certainly, you know that," said the doctor, a trifle sharply. "You have told me so." Well, oh, my will? Yes, certainly, I know that," said the doctor, a trifle sharply. "You've told me so. Well, I will tell you so again," continued the lawyer. "I have been learning something of the young Hyde." The large, handsome face of Dr. Jekyll grew pale to the very lips, and there came a blackness about his eyes. "I do not care to hear more," said he. "This is a matter I thought we had agreed to drop." "Well, what I heard was abominable," said Mr. Utterson. "It can make no change. You do not understand my position," returned the doctor, with a certain incoherency of manner. "I am painfully situated, Utterson. My position is very strange, a very strange one. It is one of those affairs that cannot be mended by talking." "Jekyll," said Utterson, "you know me. I'm a man to be trusted. Make a clean breast of this in confidence, and I make no doubt that I can get you out of it." "My good Utterson," said the doctor, "this is very good of you. This is downright good of you, and I cannot find words to thank you in. I believe you fully. I would trust you before any man alive, I before myself, if I could make the choice. But, indeed, it isn't what you fancy. It's not as bad as all that. And just to put your good heart at rest, I will tell you one thing. The moment I choose, I can be rid of Dr. Hyde. I give you my hand upon that. I thank you again and again. I will add just one little word, Utterson, that I'm sure that you'll take in good part. This is a private matter, and I beg of you to let it sleep." Utterson reflected a little, looking in the fire. "I have no doubt you're perfectly right," he said at last, getting to his feet. "Well, but since we have touched upon this business, and for the last time I hope," continued the doctor, "there's one point I should like you to understand. I have really a very great interest in poor Hyde. I know you have seen him. I know you have seen him, and he told me so, and I fear he was rude. But I do sincerely take a great, very great interest in that young man, and if I am taken away, Mr. Utterson, I wish you to promise me that you will bear with him and get his rights for him. I think if you would, if you knew all, and it would be a great weight off my mind if you would promise." "I can't pretend that I will ever like him," said the lawyer. "I don't ask that," pleaded Jekyll, laying his hand upon the other's arm. "I only ask for justice. I only ask you to help him for my sake, when I am no longer here." Utterson heaved an irrepressible sigh. "Well," said he, "I promise." And with that, another episode of Storytelling Live has come to a close, and I thank you very much, very, very much for staying with me. The language, it's not like how I use language. I'll admit I have an easier time reading my own stories. And we're going to get into that too. So at the beginning, much better than sitting in front of the screen that distressed me, calming though the story made to be intense. Diana, thank you very much, and let me see the rest of your comment. Hopefully not a Jekyller here. I do love story time. Thank you so much. And fade, yes. So we're gonna fade into the night, and I hope that your skies have cleared, and I hope that fire is far from your house, and I hope that COVID is far from your household, and I hope that the justices allow us to maintain our health care. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Mike. And I hope that the justices allow us to keep our health care, and I hope that the justices do not overturn Roe v. Wade. Oh, God. It can go sideways from here. The society is changing beneath our feet. Yeah, I'm tired. We're going to start again next week. We're already in September. Remember, there are only 3 or 4 days in each of these weeks. By next week, we will know a little bit more about, I think they're going to, I don't know, Cruz. Oh, Jesus. Ted Cruz was on his list, you know what I'm saying? Shit. So, may everyone be safe. And may you all have a very, very pleasant night. And thank you so much for attending Storytelling Live. There's more to say, but I'm not going to say it. Not now. Not now. Thank you, Amira. Good night.